Cedric said, "Let me see your war face." Oh, pardon me. You have returned. And welcome back, my dear spectator. I take it you'd like to know what happens in part 2 of the Tale of Skaho Academy. You want to know if our heroes ever find the legendary temple, or if they just end up getting picked off one by one by the perils of the swamp. Actually, I could use a refresher myself. Good golly, it's been some time since I've recorded that story. Probably about 40 years, in fact. And I've been around much longer than that, mind you. One of the perks of being a great sorcerer, you get to see many a generation flicker by in your eye like the fire of candlelight. Me getting poetic again and carried away, and I tend to delay. Sorry, but well, let's say we jump right into it. See what becomes of our heroes. What are their names? Jin, Olgur, Doru, Maris, and the elf. Huh? Yes. Alright. Well then, settle in and witness part 2 of the Tale of Skaho Academy. What had happened? Let's see, there was the spring festival, rendezvous at the town of Tushasia. Men get lost in the swamplands, come across some companions there, and, oh yes. Sareth got eaten, and Jin pocketed the mysterious idol. Wondering how they had lost their way and how far they were now from Tushasia, the party began to feel worried that the swamp would never let them leave, just as it had now given Sareth a life sentence. Finally, they came upon a great black lake, and as they approached its banks, the mist subsided like an ethereal gate, opening to reveal a great structure on the other side. An overgrown ruins, a temple. Doru put a hand to his brow.
The Temple of Skaho. We found it. Now just to get to the other side.
After observing the tar-black water, Olgur picked up a stick and tossed it in. The water morphed into a tentacle-like appendage and pulled it underwater. Maris swallowed.
Looks like it'll be around we go.
The party began heading around the lake, bushwhacking as the coast became more and more overgrown until even a giant with a great big falchion wouldn't be able to carve his way through. Jin moved to the front of the group and asked his comrades to step back. He raised his hands and muttered the words, "Power within," opening and closing his hands several times until finally, a great blast of fire more grand and hotter than he had ever managed before melted a hole in the underbrush. The party were aghast as Jin now surveyed the lines on his hands. "I have the power now to control." Jin suddenly fell to the ground, fatigued, and Olgur rushed to his aid. Suddenly, and out of the corner of Doru's eye glimmered a white celestial light. Soon it caught the gazes of the elf and the dwarf as well, and they were all perplexed by its beauty as it just seemed to hover over the glassy waters.
It's incandescent beauty,
muttered the dwarf. Olgur remembered what the Overlord Tusk had said about a tantalizing light out in the lake and beckoned his party not to look at it, but by the time he had gazed up to them, they were already wading out into the lake towards it. With Jin still recovering, Olgur shielded his eyes and rushed out into the ebony waters to retrieve his friends. As soon as he had touched the elf and the dwarf, they snapped back into reality as if breaking from a spell, but Doru was still transfixed, like a moth to flame.
Doru!
Shouted Olgur as he waded up to his friend and shook him vigorously. They were both now waist-deep in the water and found it ever difficult to move. The light was nearly upon them, and as Olgur grabbed Doru about the shoulders, he pulled him vigorously into the water just as the light emerged to reveal a demon of the swamp that bore many long, transparent teeth. The light itself extended from a cord connecting to the creature's forehead. It leapt to gnash the air and would have bitten clean into Doru had Ogor not slung him into the filthy water. Doru finally broke from his gaze and realized where he was. The monster emerged for another attack, but the elf caught it in the cheek with his rapier. They all tugged and pulled against the constricting amorphous water as the beast attempted to circle away from the threats of the dwarf and the elf to find a moment to sink its teeth into Doru. It was only just kept at bay every time. They were just about back on the shore when Ogor was tripped by the black water, causing him to fall into the mud and lose his grip on Doru. Doru had his back turned to the demon fish as it emerged to open its perilous maw to surround him. Another blast of fire came barreling into the creature's mouth, scorching it and sending it forevermore back into the black depths from whence it came. Ogor gazed back to see Jin fall to the floor once more, but this time completely limp. The party stabilized their companion. The dwarf hoisted him upon his shoulders, and they withdrew from the coast. Doru looked over his shoulder at the now dimly moonlit lagoon and realized he had just narrowly cheated death. The party came before the great temple now, its walls eroding and decaying like a sandcastle wet from rain and melting into the earth. Vines now triumphed over its walls, and though no sound came from beyond its exterior, a sense of dis-ease could be felt trickling out of its pores. They had found the main gate, which was a giant stone bulwark. After pressing on it and with no apparent way to get in, they decided to circumvent the right side of the temple until they came to a part in the wall that had fallen away, allowing access within. Still drowsy, Jin was placed up against the exterior of the wall, and the rest proceeded inside. They were met with a bedchamber and came across several notes written by various wizards and alchemists, some of which spoke uneasily of the goings-on within the academy.
An academy? Who would want to go to school here?
Asked the dwarf. I imagine at one point it was once beautiful, spoke the elf, examining a cave-in that had blocked further entry into the academy. Something went wrong. The elf then removed some dust to reveal a map of the temple carved into the floor. There appears to be an alternate entrance opposite this side of the gate. Let's keep looking around, spoke Doru. Try to get a handle on this place before we delve any further. They continued to scour the room to discover that the founder of this alchemical academy, Makalish, a native to the town of Tushasu, was a graduate from the most famous alchemist school in all the land, the alchemists of the Sieg Mountains.
A Sieg alchemist,
Spoke Ogor.
This Makalish was no mere hermit magician.
Yes, but it seems she wasn't quite a perfect student either.
Doru held up a decaying piece of paper written by a member of the Sieg alchemists. You have utterly disgraced the guild. Your fusing of sentient beings for the purpose of creating new elixirs goes against all that the Alchemist Guild stands for. We have been informed that you have been creating abominations under the roof of our guild like a godless warlock. This kind of malevolent activity cannot be forgiven, and you are therefore relinquished of your standing in the guild and everything from it that you have earned.
It's signed Elon, Sieg Arch-Alchemist.
Muttered Olgor as he gazed back up to Doru.
Who drove her to such madness?
The floor rumbled beneath them, followed by a distant gurgle as if an ogre had just let out an inebriated belch. The behemoth, whispered the elf, and everyone scrambled to find a hiding place under a bed or amongst fallen debris or up against the inner part of the wall. Soon, the rumbling came from just outside the temple, and Olgor realized that Jin was still leaning up against the opening in the wall, dazed and confused. Olgor crawled towards his friend and yanked the dead weight of his body inside, and only a moment later did the behemoth frog peek its lifeless, unblinking eyes into the hole. The party members each held their breath, careful not to move even a pebble. Soon enough, the beast was on its way into the misty beyond.
We have to find a way into this temple,
Spoke Doru.
Let's find that alternate entrance.
Good.
Spoke the dwarf, squinting his milky white eyes.
It's getting a little too bright out here for me anyways.
even though the party had hardly seen a ray of light shine down through the canopy the whole time they had been out there.
Believe it or not, Maris, the sun has likely already begun to set. We left Tushasu just before noon and have been out here for at least 6 hours. We'll stay here for the night. We may not get a safer location to get some deep rest.
The party arranged the beds up against the open hole in the wall to barricade it from any unwanted visitors in the night, and set up their own sleeping bags behind it.
So, Elf,
Spoke old Gore.
you've been awful quiet this whole time. If you don't mind my asking, where were you and the dwarf coming from before we ran into you?
The elf opened his mouth, and there might have been words coming out of it, but in less than a whisper. Speech, if any, that was inaudible even to old Gore's keen ears. He finally exhaled and began speaking in a low, wispy voice, like one would when telling tales of a frightening sword around a fire. Trapped and shackled I was in the caverns of Nor. This room I spent in distance, no resistance for so long, for my slavers had long been God to me. He continued on in this sort of poetic manner, old Gore not knowing if he often spoke so eloquently, as high elves have been known to have a way with words, or if the speech was flowing through him like some eerie incantation. He continued in this manner, explaining that he had been freed by a Dampier, one born of the union of a vampire and a mortal, oftentimes less than consensually. That this Dampier, Nolas was his name, led he and Maris not out of the cavern but down towards his quarry where a most insidious ordeal took place. I don't wish to speak on this any longer, for I fear Nolas may still be out there and perhaps listening,
Right.
chimed in Maris.
Might we get some sleep then in preparation for God knows what lies before us. Good night, chaps.
And with that, each of them climbed into bed while Doru meditated in the corner of the room. He tightened his headband and pressed his hands together in front of his heart. The monk took in a deep breath and released it into the still air of the room.
Guide our path. Lead not astray.
Morning came as a cacophony of croaking frogs and screeching birds. The party ate a quick breakfast, and then they headed out around the other side of the gate. They finally came to a barred sewer grate that was built into the wall. The door ajar and the same black water as before was leaking from it into a pond opposite them.
The alternative entrance is through a sewer, eh?
Asked the dwarf, his billhook already in both hands as if he were ready for a fight at any minute.
I don't like the feel of this,
Mumbled old Gore. There was a fear in his voice. Doru tightened his headband and thought about what to do.
Let's go back to the gate. There has to be some lever we missed that can open...
A dart bounced off the wall right in front of his face, and he whipped around to find a throng of pygmies on the other side of the bank from them. Some had blowguns pressed against their lips, while others waved sickles.
Into the sewers, now!
Shouted Doru, as half a dozen of the throng of pygmies began to circle around the pond to meet them. The party rushed impetuously inside the thick sewer grate, as poisonous blow darts bounced off the wall next to them. It took a great deal of strength from several of the party members to finally close and lock the door behind them. But once they had, they were finally met with darkness and the sound of trickling water beneath their feet.
Stick close to me.
Doru motioned with a wave of his hand. He whispered under his breath.
Lead not astray. Lead not astray.
Less than a minute had gone by before they were greeted with the same perilous gurgling from before. It was coming from just up ahead. It's in here with us, spoke Jin. He pointed beneath them.
Hey, a hatch.
Spoke the dwarf. Doru lifted up the hatch as the splashing footsteps grew louder.
Get inside,
He whispered. The party entered underneath the barred floor drain until the behemoth frog came wallowing. It turned around like a dog and laid down right on top of them. There was a pipe in the wall beside them that carried water to the outside, but it was too small to fit through. They were trapped. But thankfully, a frog didn't know they were there. Its belly glowed with a faint bioluminescence, so luckily they weren't in pitch blackness. The party members carefully and quietly dug through their packs to look for something that could help them get out of this situation. Old Gore withdrew the genie lamp that was in his pack and inspected it curiously. The elf withdrew his sword and placed a finger to his lips. He raised the point of his rapier up and thrust it deep into the frog's belly. A monstrous squawking bellow came from above as the frog rose up and began banging on the grate that was separating them from its wrath. Each bang bent the bars more and more, and all the party could do was wait for their doom. Fortune was on their side, though, as the frog finally collapsed backwards in pain.
We have to find a way out. Run!
Shouted Doru at the top of his lungs. The party slung open the hatch and began dashing away from the frog, who was still hobbling towards them. They were forced to flee deeper and deeper into the sewer. As they were running, Old Gore tripped and fell face first into the sewage. The beast was now right in front of him, and as he turned over to look at it, he realized that he was still holding the genie lamp. He rubbed it vigorously just as the frog was opening its mouth, and out came the genie, who created a barrier between them and the monstrosity.
Take your chance and make your escape.
Old Gore jumped to his feet, leaving the lamp behind, and rushed after his companions. They came to a door at the end of the sewer and closed it behind them. They had thought they had known pitch darkness before, but were now united with a new sense of black. And it was quiet. Only a shallow layer of the dark water filled the room, but it came no higher than the soles of their feet. No one spoke, for a deep sense of fear from beyond filled their minds, and though it was dead quiet, something was not right. "We are not alone," spoke Jin. "Something moves,"
I can see it too,
spoke the dwarf.
but it's hard to make out.
The elf, with his rapier still in hand, lit a torch, and Doru followed his lead. The darkness was so unnaturally thick that it choked the reach of the torch with its thick haze. Something scurried along the wall to the left of them, and then the ceiling, but wherever Doru waved his torch, he could not see anything. Thunder could be heard outside, and then rain. Suddenly the room was beginning to pool, and quickly.
We have to find a way out. Go!
Shouted Doru. The scurrying seemed to be coming from anywhere and everywhere at this point, as the party shuffled through the dark, empty room held up by only a few pillars. They finally came to some rungs on the wall that led up to a trapdoor. By this time, though, the black water was already up to their knees and making it hard to move quickly.
Kelvin, behind you!
Shouted the dwarf, and the elf whipped around to discover a terrible mutated beast illuminated by his torchlight. Its body like that of a monitor lizard, it had a broad snout crowded by dozens of different eyes. A long tongue danced in its mouth, which mimicked the waving of its tail, and its tail every so often cracked like cat-o'-nine tails. It breathed out a stench worse than death. The party scrambled towards the ladder as fast as they could as the beast whirled towards them, lashing with its mighty jaws and whipping its tail. It was kept at bay only by the slashing of the elf, Calvain's sword. The party now climbed up the ladder, and Doru, the first to push open the trapdoor, was met with rain.
The way is clear!
Shouted Doru, and Calvain, desperate to behold the fright outside, once again surrendered a fatal glance, and a spine from one of the creature's many-pronged tails impaled his abdomen. The pain was great, but he dared not clutch the wound for fear of forsaking either torch or sword. And so, he continued back through the thick black soup until the beast came in for a mighty bite. Calvain's thrust was swift and true as he pierced one of the many eyes of the beast. The mutated abomination recoiled backwards, and Calvain took the opportunity to turn his back and rush towards the ladder. He had to swim the last few paces, for the roiled water was rising quickly. But with the helping hand of the dwarf, he was finally able to grasp the rungs. As he climbed, he felt another piercing pain in his back, which made his eyes water, but he did not stop. Finally, he reached the top and with the help of his newfound friends finally hoisted himself into the cold exterior of the academy courtyard. Doru and Olgor slammed and sealed the trapdoor behind them. They stared at it, panting heavily, but thankfully no resistance came. Everyone let out a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived as they each helped lay Kelvane against the wall beside the trapdoor. He had 2 large gaping wounds that were bleeding heavily, and his breath was becoming heavier and heavier, and then weaker and weaker.
We can get through this. We've gone through worse, Kelvane.
Stammered the dwarf, his hands shaking.
We escaped Hobgoblin prison together. Survived the wrath of a Dampier. We can do this. You can do this.
Kelvane nodded and took in one last breath. Yes, you can, Maris. And then his breathing stopped, and he sank lifelessly against the wall. Maris cried softly into the breast of his fallen brother, and then turned to the rest of the group.
I should never have followed you. First we lost one in the frog. Now Kelvane. My dear friend. You want to get us all killed on this death track? All of us!
The dwarf pushed through the party to survey his surroundings. They were in a circular courtyard open to the elements. The rain fell heavily and drained into a large pit in the center where, at the bottom, lurked a gargantuan half-rotting crocodile. Maris shook his head.
We've all bitten off far more than we can chew.
And perhaps they have. But thus concludes part 2 of the tale of Skaho Academy.